My name is Mateusz. I'm a regenerative farmer from Poland who's on a mission of, broadly speaking, or from high-level perspective, transitioning food and agricultural systems from conventional to regenerative with farmer in the center. And in more reductionist way, I am about putting farmers at the center of climate change mitigation adaptation efforts in a profitable way for those farmers, which, according to how I, let's say, see the world, will get us going a long way to that bigger objective and mission that I'm living, right? And of course, I'm super privileged to be living that mission as first and foremost an active farmer, also CEO of European Carbon Farmers, which is a business that has been spun out of the family farm, and also working with the European Commission, United Nations, both at COP26 and UN Food System Summit, and with Pope Francis within the Economia Francesco umbrella. So there's a lot going on, but at the core of it, I am a farmer, right? And that experience is what makes me do other things because we are all connected. Yeah.
Fantastic. So could you tell me a little bit about your story? Kind of how did you come to this work? Were you raised in a farming family, for example?
Yes, I have, right? I've been born on a family farm, which now I am part of, or I continue being part of. That farm has been growing rapidly over the years and is also like, doing wonderful work in terms of progress on regeneration and other dimensions, economic dimension being, of course, the key one there till today, right? So basically, as I've been growing up and learning English around the age of, I don't know, 14, 15, 16, I basically got invited to take ownership of us buying machines from outside of Poland that we would otherwise not be able to buy in Poland. And therefore, like, significantly contribute to basically the bottom line of this operation. And I've succeeded with that, which made me want to study abroad and do international business, which I have done. But the story is very much an emergent story of, being where you are and figuring out, okay, what's the next right thing I can do within those circumstances, with a huge element of, let's call it, even though that's really, once again, reductionist way of looking at it, a lot of networking, right? Connecting with people, being pushed out of your comfort zone, asking questions, being asked questions, thinking about, hey, why am I doing what we are doing or what I'm doing? Can I do that better? Maybe I shouldn't be doing the things we are doing, or like all those questions. And well, this basically the process of living my life led me to where I am right now, right?
Yeah. So what's the situation like in Poland generally for farming? Because I've spoken to other people who've said, in Europe, you don't really learn anything about regenerative agriculture, right? It's all traditional using big machines and plows and pesticides.
Yeah, so this is a really complex question because it really depends, right? And just to make a few things clear, like, we are using big tractors on our farm, and I would consider us, a regenerative farm because we are on the process of understanding our cycles of nature, understanding ecosystem services provided by the ecosystem that we are the steward of, and then enhancing those, right, in a profitable way, so that we are capturing some of those ecosystem services and then monetizing them, right, without compromising the others. And my simple answer to like your big question, like, what the situation in Europe is: if you want to learn, you will. If you want to make change, you will. If you want to, put anything you want, in that, if you want to, you will, right? And I agree. You may be thinking like, oh, in the US, whatever, Australia, Amazon forest, or you pick any other place of the world, like the grass is greener there, and like there's no doubt people in those parts of the world are doing wonderful things when it comes to regeneration, but we do as well, right? Both in Poland and more broadly Europe, and I could be like naming, my colleague farmers from across the continent, and more broadly or widely the world, doing precisely that, right? Of course, you have the systemic nature of the change we want to see, which means you have to, not that you have to, but like if you want to make that into a systemic change, from my perspective, you have to, and you may argue otherwise, you have to engage with the regulator, you have to engage with the policy framework. So you are kind of both a policymaker, lobbyist, diplomat, and a politician to some extent. So like that is, not that it is a challenge, but like it's simply another dimension to that discussion, right? If we are talking about regenerative agriculture.
Ah, wow. So I will have to say that my knowledge about regenerative agriculture is still in the beginning stages. Personally, I have a tiny garden, but I'm trying to learn a little bit more about that. But so for people watching who don't really understand, like what is regenerative agriculture, you gave a reductionist, simplified explanation of that.
Yeah, very simply, regenerative agriculture is a way of stewarding ecosystem. It's more than farming, right? Like actively whatever cultivating the soil. Regenerative agriculture is a way of stewarding the ecosystem in a way in which ecosystem services provided by that ecosystem are at least constant, like you are not diminishing those, i.e., the sustainability conversation, or you are enhancing those ecosystem services by your stewardship and specific actions that you are taking, hence regeneration or nature positive, right? And then kind of, because you can be a regenerative forester, right? And that's different to being a regenerative farm in the conditions we are in, where there's very little forest and we don't know any forest on the farm. For many reasons, partly because this is not native habitat of the farm of Poland that we are farming, or stewarding rather, I should say, right? So from the perspective of the farmer, I would be looking at regenerative agriculture through two lenses or dimensions. One is restoration, and the second one is regeneration. And restoration is what you actively do or stop doing as a farmer in order to restore cycles of nature in that ecosystem that you are the steward of. And there are plenty of cycles of nature. Some of those are carbon cycle, water cycle, biodiversity cycle, energy cycle. Of course, they are all connected, right? And once you start doing that, so you are not, let's say, going against nature, of course, nature takes over, right? And is enhancing those cycles, and therefore ecosystem service provided by that ecosystem. And as we said before, your job as a farmer in this case is to be aware of this, let's say, bigger ecosystem that you are part of, and thinking about creative ways of harvesting some of those ecosystem services in order to basically make money, because this is, we are a business, and we are in the business of making money and enhancing ecosystem services. I should add.
Yeah, well, I'd imagine that some people might have that perception that it's less profitable somehow to be regenerative, even though in the long term, obviously, that is going to be better. So, yeah, do you find that that is the case, or is it possible to be just as profitable using these methods?
It's both. Like, I definitely recognize the argument you are raising, which may or may not be true, right? And the question is, what is a difference, or what are the reasons behind your question either holding true or not holding true? And my answer to that is, like, of course, you have to make it in a way which is financially profitable / sustainable throughout the process of the transition, because otherwise you will go out of business, and maybe that ecosystem will be in a better shape, maybe not, we don't know, but like you lose your, I don't want to be saying control over decision making, but like you no longer matter if you are out of business, right? As simple as that. So I totally recognize, and our farm example shows that like you can do that profitably as you transition. And many other farms show that this is totally possible as well. And to put a little bit of a framework in there, we talked about restoration and regeneration as kind of those two levers of regenerative agriculture and my thinking structure about it. What I would add to a restoration bit is that if you are running an existing farm and you are either transitioning it towards regenerative agriculture or you are already on that path, you have really 5 key levers to like play with in order to enhance your regeneration and simultaneously do that in a financially sustainable way. And those 5 levers are, first and foremost, optimization of farm inputs or production inputs, which can be further divided into seeds, crop protection inputs, and fertilizers, both synthetic and natural. So that's one. Number 2 is keeping them. Number 2 is reducing tillage with stopping plowing altogether. Number 3 is keeping the soil cover, ideally 365 days a year, ideally with a living root in that soil, so that basically liquid carbon is being pumped into the soil, and soil food web, the life in that soil, very similar to our gut, is being not disturbed by minimizing tillage, and then enhanced by keeping the soil covered. Point number 4 is enhancing biodiversity, both within field, around field, and the whole landscape, wide biodiversity, which is like increasing your resilience and is just positively contributing to ecosystem and ecosystem services. And finally, site-specific design, right? So like how that site looks like, how the landscape looks like, and therefore how are we stewarding that in the best way possible. So that's for an existing farm. And like if you are a farmer listening to me, you will hear that on every single dimension that I've just mentioned, you have opportunities for cutting your costs, right? Like if you are optimizing inputs, your costs will go down. If you are minimizing tillage, your fuel costs and other costs will go down. Of course, you are adding, changes to the system. So maybe you will have to change the equipment you are using from one to another and maybe play with your rotation. That's why the biodiversity bit comes in to manage some of the problems that are emerging in that new reality that you are going into, right? So like, I don't want to be saying like it's super simple, right? Not that it's not, it is super simple, but like it is knowledge intensive and it is action intensive as well, right? Like you have to observe, you have to act. Things will not go according to the plan because we may be predicting how future behaves, but like then we will be surprised, and you have to act accordingly, right? So that's kind of that's the effort, like having knowledge and applying it and basically doing that continuously many times over. One last thing I want to say on in this kind of discussion, or like discussing that particular part, if we are setting up a new farm, then we would kind of start backwards and we would look at the landscape first and say, hey, like what are the cycles of nature in this landscape, and therefore how are we inscribing a new farm in that landscape, right? But with the existing farms, like this is kind of the last thing you do, because it is big, right? And therefore it probably requires more money than optimizing your inputs, and you have to start generating that extra cash flow in order to be going into more advanced forms of enhancing ecosystem services / regeneration.
Brilliant. Thank you. And thank you for the specific examples, because I think that's really good for people who want a bit more information. So you're the CEO of European Carbon Farmers, and yeah, can you tell me a little bit more about what you do there and how you started?
Sure. So I think 3 parts to the story. European Carbon Farmers is one of the ways of living my mission, which is putting farmers at the center of climate change, mitigation, adaptation efforts in a profitable way for those farmers. And we have started very much rooted in 2 dimensions, which are our family farm experience, first-hand experience of transitioning a farm from emissions positive, meaning like we are emitting more greenhouse gas emissions than we are capturing, to negative emissions farm, meaning we are capturing more CO2 and storing that in our soils than some of all the other, not all the other, because we are emitting CO2 as well, but like than the sum of all greenhouse gas emissions that we are emitting on our operation, therefore being, you know, climate positive and also being nature positive as well. But like those are two different dimensions. Climate positive and nature positive, they should go hand in hand together as it is on our farm, but like they may not sometimes. But anyway, European carbon farmers is rooted in our farm's experience of doing precisely that, plus my personal experience of being super privileged to be traveling around the world for basically like 10 years since, or sorry, before COVID happened, to study, work, consult, do stuff in broadly understood agricultural space all over the world, you know, from Nigeria to India, from Brazil to Australia. And as I've been doing that, connection between climate change mitigation, agriculture being big part of the problem, unfortunately, right now, and a huge potential contributor in this whole debate emerged, right? And so I tried bringing that home, or I tried rather engage with entities of different sorts, working in that space to generate extra revenue for our farm, which was already on that path of transition and capturing more CO2 than we've been emitting. But long story short was there was nobody who we could trade with back at the time, which was May last year, May 2020. So we said to ourselves, hey, if we are serious about this, you know, putting farmers at the center of climate change mitigation adaptation efforts in a profitable way for them, we have to step up the game and like, yes, still be the farm, but like set up a venture that is working in that space. And so we did last year. And this is precisely what I'm working on, right? Or we are working on as a business. And specifically, what we do right now is we do promotion of carbon farming as such, and we are working on educating our farmers by bringing the Cool Farm Tool emission calculator to Poland, translating that into Polish and making that freely available to the Polish farming community, with a view of possibly originating agricultural carbon credits at some point in the future, if that makes sense, both business-wise and like framework-wise, because the EU is working hard on those topics. That space is like super active and super nascent at the same time. So the bottom line, connected with, you know, one of the questions you've asked me at the beginning, we are doing what we can. We are definitely not doing everything that we can, but we are doing strategic things that make sense in the circumstances that we are in. That's why we are engaging a lot with the Polish Ministry of Agriculture and the European Union, EU Commission, because, you know, the way we see the framework right now is that if you want to make, once again, the systemic change, you have to be approaching policy very much, of course, doing things physically on the ground on a farm, but like also having that connection with the regulator, which we are basically working on. Yeah.
Great. So I want to ask you about the Poland context a little bit then. So how is the work going down in Poland? Like, are people receptive to it?
Very much so, yes. Like, I mean, what you will hear farmers talk or say, or like, you know, what the attitude is, and like, you know, wearing my farmer's hat, being on the farm that I am, like I fall into that category as well, is like, we are aware that climate is changing. Our business model is somehow challenged by climate, but also by, well, the commodity prices right now are super high, but like, you know, they will not be growing forever, and they may drop as well. The prices of inputs are high and rising. And when you are basically extrapolating those trends, you end up in a reality that you may not wish to be in, right? Which is the exercise that we have done with our farm in 2004. And therefore we made decisions to change, because we knew we are not profitable back then to the extent we wanted to. and we were going to be less and less profitable going forward. So that's why we've been changing, and farmers are aware about that. Farmers are aware about the EU policy that is coming, like net zero by 2050, even though this is marketed as being far away into the future, which it really is not. And then biodiversity strategy, farm to fork strategy, which will be tremendous. I don't want to be saying shocks to the system, but like new frameworks to which the system will have to adapt. So the farmers are all aware about that, right? But at the same time, there's very, very, very little kind of insight on so what, right? Like, okay, we know we are kind of not happy. We know we are contributing here and there. We don't know really why, right? And where. That's why we are bringing the Cool Farm tool to talk about real numbers, and not like, oh, I think I'm not emitting, or like I think you are emitting a lot, to like inform this conversation. And we know this policy is changing like rapidly and quickly, and to a massive extent and degree. And the question is kind of how do you bridge that middle, right? Where the extension comes in. Like what's really, really needed is extension and lighthouse farms, right? So like having farms that are already doing stuff in that space, or maybe are simply like already in this future that we are all trying to get to, being real life examples of like, hey, this is how you do it, this is how our financials look like, and so on. So that's what's really needed, right? And with European carbon farmers, we, not that I think, but like I'm fairly sure, we are replying to what's needed by bringing the specific tool to Poland, and by doing the work in terms of communication bridging that we are doing between the farmer or farmers that we are representing, like specific ones, and the community more broadly, and informing the regulator and having those conversations about like, hey, this is where we are, and this is where we have to get to, and we have so many years. What do we do, right? So my bottom line point is, you have great extension, the farms and farming agricultural system will change. You don't have good extension or like spectacular extension, you will be struggling. Which we are, like I mean, in some parts of the world we are struggling, but like as I've said or been saying throughout like our discussion, we are at the same time not like hopeless, and we are doing doing work in that space.
So you've talked a bit about your goal and the mission that drives you forward. So can you tell me a bit more about that? Like, what is the vision of the future that motivates you?
Great question, and not nobody asked me it like that, so I have to think a little bit about it. But like my big dream is that we are net zero by or before 2050 in a nature positive way during and of course beyond that transition to 2050. And that I don't want to be saying somehow in that process, because this is like really not specific, right? But like in that process, we tackle our systemic injustices that are present in the system at local, regional, national, and global level, right? And kind of talking from global to local, you have the capital flows and north-south divide, which is like, totally true and totally present. So like that, like I don't want to be living in a world by 2015 which you have that division. I am aware that will not happen on its own, right? Like we have to aid that. That's why I'm like kind of working a lot on African topics as well, which is one of my hats. But I think that the bottom line point I'm trying to make is, we need like those big systemic changes will not happen when on the ground, small little things are staying the same. And on the ground, small little things are not changing because government is making a decision. On the ground, little things are changing because like I decide to do something differently, even though that may not be in my best, let's say, monetary interest right now, or that may be an annoyance, or that may be whatever, right? Like so you and me and like many other millions, like everyone matter, and like we all matter in making that change. And that kind of compounds, right? But of course, as we do that, we have to be, which also, I think I've been talking about with a specific example of agriculture and this, farmers speaking with the regulator and so on, we have to be doing that. I don't want to be saying in a coordinated manner, like centrally, but like we have to be coordinating our efforts somehow, so that once again we have a systemic view, recognizing that we at the same time not really understand the system to like the fullest extent, but still we are trying to impact the system in a smart way, right? It's not only me doing something and only you doing something else, but it's about you and me doing something with many other people, and like those people are connected, communicating, engaging, whatever, at different levels. So those two things, right? Like your action and your coordinated action within the larger groups, and that's totally uncomfortable, right? Like it takes effort on numerous dimensions, but well, I don't know whether I've said much about the vision. I've talked much about the action plan there, but that's it.
Yeah. It's hard sometimes to just engage with the vision of the ideal world that you can imagine. But if I was to ask you to imagine 50 years in the future, what do you dream that Poland would look like?
Great question. And I don't, like framing it as Poland is difficult, and at the same time, that's my country that I love and I really care about. So I would definitely see Poland within the next 50 years, or in 50 years time, Poland is an active member of the European Union, which has grown. And I don't know, like, I mean, definitely has grown size-wise, and definitely has grown in terms of like the level of coordination and cooperation within that union. So has grown the world in terms of the cooperation between us. And I don't know how United Nations will look like in 50 years time, or African Union, or Mercosur, or ASEAN. But like, I do want to see that growing, like those processes growing, and Poland within those processes. And like, I want that to be, or I would wish to have that substantiated with what I've said before, which is this cooperation at a local level, which is kind of, unfortunately, a, like historically challenging in my country to a much larger extent than it is, than it is a challenge in, say, Germany or Netherlands or Denmark. So that's that. And then, of course, I do see us managing our ecosystems and our landscapes and terrain really in a way that is nature positive, right? Be it in forestry, in the cities, in agriculture. I see us doing much better at water management, which is very, very, very poor right now. But those are kind of tacticals, right? And I do see us being like very patriotic as we are right now, but at the same time, very, very open to the other, right? Which we have some work to do. And then this patriotism will be like framed in the proper word of in the proper sense of that word, rather than in not a proper sense of that word. But like, once again, like it won't be me dreaming about that future. I mean, certainly dreaming and sharing that future. So thank you for that opportunity. Helps with like getting clearer, or hey, where do you see Poland? And then maybe getting other people maybe inspired, and B, definitely thinking about those things. And and of course everybody is invited to disagree with me, but then ultimately it's about, well, putting that into practice, as we talked today. And also, very important, taking a moment to celebrate sometimes, right? So like, in our discussion, we talked a lot about like, hey, what needs to be done, how things are, and like what the challenges are. It's good to be like taking a pause every so often and be like, yeah, like we have all those many things to do. Maybe like we shouldn't be worried about all of those for the time being, like all together, but like let's choose some of those to focus on, but be aware how far away we went, right? Like I've been talking about Poland being part of the EU. Poland is part of the EU already, right? Which is like a tremendous success and a huge blessing and a huge responsibility as well, for many parties, including Poland, of course. So yeah, like sorry for talking so much, but like those are things that come to mind.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's so true that we really need to stop and celebrate where we've come so far, right? Not just look at the deficit of what needs to be done. Yeah. Thank you so much for talking to me today. And yeah, is there anything else you'd like to add before we finish?
No, I wanted to say thank you to you for the work you are doing, for this podcast in particular, and for the opportunity to like be able to share some of my thoughts with you and whoever will be listening to that podcast. So thank you to you, whoever you are on the listening end, for listening. Feel free to disagree and of course engage with what I've been sharing. I'm here for you if I can be of any help, and I'm grateful for the opportunity and for the work you are doing, Gwyneth. Thank you so much.
Thank you.